All right, so let's move on to our next segment. I want to welcome back Nicholas Lloyd, the voice and the man behind Lindybeige. If you haven't had a chance, check out the Lindybeige channel on YouTube. He has over 1 million subscribers, an incredible diversity of just fun things to watch. Today, we're going to learn, I think, about ancient warships, right, right, Nicholas?
Good, good. Yes, that's the plan. Ancient warships. And as you can see, a picture behind me, and I hope that the lighting is better than last week, but you are very definitely on a laptop. That's why you might move around a little bit. Right, so behind me we have an early picture of a Greek warship. Now, we know that they had specialized warships in the ancient world. We're talking here about the Mediterranean. That is, ships that were useless for cargo or pretty much anything else. They were just for war. And one of the earlier ones is called a pentaconta. And this is the sort of thing that we have to interpret. What the hell are we looking at here? At the bottom, you can see clearly 2 rows of men who all appear to be rowing. But is one row actually on top of the other, or are they on the other side of the ship? You can see that it takes a fair bit of interpretation, but what the scholars have come up with for this is a sort of sea dart-like thing, which looks like, wait for it if I can, unfortunately I only have one screen to work with here, so maybe this will work. Pink. There we go, right. So there is a very, very long 50-oared vessel with 25 guys down each side. Now, I was looking at the rowing times for in the Olympics, and you know they have different events for 2 in a boat, 4 in a boat, 8 in a boat, and so forth. And essentially, the more people you have in a boat, the faster you go. So this is taking it to about the engineering limits of the time, because the keel has to be a solid, really strong piece of wood, and has to have a bit of flex in it, and you can't really have a joint. So after a while, you just can't find a tree that's tall enough to do a keel in one go. But if you want something that goes really amazingly fast, well, this, using ancient technology, was just about, you know, the fastest thing you can do. So it's a ram, and that's about it. You've got a ram, a load of rowers, a couple of guys at the back with steering oars, which predate the rudder, but actually they work fine. People think that rudders are way better. Steering oars work fine. That wasn't a problem. And at the front, you've got just a little platform for a guy at the front to go, quick, turn to the left, or whatever, just shouting out an order. And here's another reconstruction of the same sort of thing. This one's got the guy at the front, but no one to powering him. And at the back, a couple of shields to protect the oarsmen. It's thought that enemy archers might have prioritized shooting at the steerers on the other ship, if there were any archers. So that's an early one, the pentaconta. But things got more sophisticated, and you can see that we have paintings like this, and that seems to have rowers, more than one bank of oars. You've got apparently a set of oars going to the top of the ship there. Can you see others that appear to be poking through holes? That's what we call a bireme. And at the front, a ram sticking at the front. Again, it seems to be made out of something else. It looks as though it's clad in bronze or something. Also, it's worth pointing out at this point that all these warships were also sailing vessels, because if you want to get to the battle, you couldn't row the whole way there because you'd be exhausted. And about 18% of the weight of one of these ships would be mast and sails. But when they got to a battle site, they would take the masts down, detach them, and if they could, they would put them on shore. They didn't want to be carrying that extra weight. The battle would be done by oar power. Now, here we have a very famous relief, and this appears to show three banks of oarsmen, quite definitely one above the next. And this is the best illustration we have of this arrangement of what's called a trireme. 3 reams of oars, and there's a lot of debate as to what reme, that's R-E-M-E, actually means. But reconstructions put the rowers, as you can see in this battle, above each other. So you've got an awful lot. The length of the ship hasn't changed because they're still limited with the keel, but what they can do is they can build upwards. So you have 3 banks of oars all powering this thing, and so you've got, again, a giant ram. This is a trireme. It had a crew, we know, of 200. 170 of those would have been the oarsmen. And you've just got room on deck for just a few marines. It's thought maybe just as few as 4 archers. And this is one of the things that they would do when combating each other. You see, one of them is using its front end, its prow, its ram, to smash all the oars off its opponent. And once, of course, you've gone grrr down one side of the enemy, snapping all these oars, you've immobilized him. But this requires a lot of training, because you have to be able to say, hard right, left side in, or whatever. And so all the guys have to do the last heave with the oars, and then on the appropriate side, they have to pull their oars in quickly so they don't get their own oars snapped. And you've got to do this faster than the other guy can get his oars in. And it seems that the Athenians got so good at it, they could even do a sharp turn and use the back end of the ship, the stern oar shear, to snap all the oars of the enemy. Does it work? Well, here is the Olympias. They made one. It was a Greek-British cooperation. And as you can see, it's got, well, you probably can just about see it's got 3 banks of oars. You can also see where those men are standing, that the whole ship sort of bows upwards, because it's got a bit of flex in it. So when you put the 170 oarsmen in below decks, that straightens things out a bit. And you see it's got its sails up at that time. And this is the Battle of Salamis, which is the biggest clash of triremes. This is when the Persians tried to invade Greece, and the Greeks objected to that. And it was a colossal sea battle, with just vast numbers of men involved on both sides. The resources are astounding. Here we've got some coins and another bit of evidence. They seldom picture the whole of the ship, annoyingly, but we get quite a lot of shots of prows. Can you see the one on the right has got what looks like an eye painted on the front? Well, might not have been painted, but it's sculpted to be that. And a lot of reconstructions have these eyes on the front. And there's another one of the rams. That one appears to have 3 spikes. And a lot of people have pointed out that if you look at a modern ship, they've very often got precisely that shape on the front, which is good on a long, fast ship for the hydrodynamics. So it could be that either deliberately or accidentally they shaped their rams like that to give themselves a bit more oomph. Now then, this is a later ship. Later, the standard ship was the trireme at the height of the classical period. But then as you go through to the Hellenistic period, this we're talking about 3rd century BC, you get quads becoming the standard, and then quinques, in other words, 4 reams, and then 5 reams. This is a Roman quinquereme. But how did they arrange that? Now, here is a speculative reconstruction, and you can see that it doesn't have 5 stories of oars, because if I go on a bit, there we go. Here's an attempt at reconstructing 5 above each other. The ships start getting ridiculously tall. Wind hitting the side of the ship would make it very unstable. The weight of all those men would make it unstable. And can you see that the guys at the top have got ludicrously long oars? And as you go further and further up, they would get steeper and steeper, so that the guys at the top would be rowing at a ridiculously awkward angle, if that's the way they actually intended to do it. So it's thought that instead the word ream perhaps is a row not of oars but of oarsmen. And so can you see on the top oar and on the middle oar here, you've got 2 men on each. So that is one possible way that they could have arranged 5 guys to row 3 oars. And in this illustration, you can see here's a possible way that they could have had 16 guys rowing 2 giant oars, one above the other, in 2 groups of 8. But if you get 16 guys, and these don't have sliding seats, these are just sitting on a bench, the amount of sweep you've got in the water is tiny. So we still haven't really solved this problem. And yet we know from the literature that they didn't stop at quads and quinques. They went to septares, octares, and it got ridiculous. There are even references to 40. 40? So they had, what, two oars with 20 guys on each? It is a problem that the scholars are still wrestling with. And I now whoop, it stopped working. I have to go back now because we've come to the end of that set of illustrations. Sorry about that. Right. Now here is Greek fire. This is the most famous illustration from the period. This doesn't come about until the Byzantine era, and the recipe has been lost, but it was used in naval warfare, and they had some sort of nozzle, it seems, that they were able to pump. This is a speculative reconstruction of what it might have looked like, and some people come up with very, very spectacular pictures like that, which that's extremely optimistic for range. How on earth you'd get the pressure using Byzantine technology? Can you see on the right there are two guys working a pump? They did have pumps, but maybe that's a little bit over dramatic. But you can see that at very short range, that could have been pretty darn devastating. Now then, we say that it's ridiculous, of course. These ones, 40, it's ridiculous, it's laughable. These colossal ships couldn't possibly have existed, and that's what most people thought until they found some of them. This is one of Caligula's ships. There were two of them found in Lake Nemi in Italy. And this thing was 240 feet long, 79 feet wide. And to give you an idea of just how big that is, you know those things that incredibly rich people have these days called super yachts? Well, to be cast as a super yacht, it has to be 78 feet long. 78 feet is ridiculous. That's the width of this thing. This thing had mosaic floors. It had hot and cold running water through lead pipes. It had fireplaces. And it's on, though, really not a very big lake. So it is always presumed that this was just some sort of floating pleasure palace. But it does show you that they did have the technology to build it. And these survived because they went down in a very shallow lake. I say survived. They were found in the 1920s, and then they thought, oh, brilliant, we can have a museum, this will be great. And unfortunately, World War II happened, and a German unit was stationed near them, and at the end of the war, they had gone. And the usual explanation that I was taught when I was doing archaeology was that the unit just used it as firewood. But just checking Wikipedia yesterday, I noticed that there's another story that the Germans claim that it was incoming American artillery fire that set them ablaze, and that's why they disappeared completely. I think the first story, to be honest, is a little bit more likely, because think of how big a pile of ash you would find. It'd be rather difficult to hide. Yes, they did get extraordinarily big. Now we get these things. Sorry, I haven't been watching the clock. How long have I got?
Let's do a few more minutes.
Couple more minutes. Okay. Can you see on the deck of this ship, which is Roman, those quite clearly Roman soldiers, this is Roman relief, you've got what looks like a little castle. Can you see a little fort? And you've even got little stones making it up. It is generally thought that these were not stone, but that they were, because they wanted to remind people of how safe you would feel if they were stone, they painted stones on the outside of them. And most modern reconstructions have them as wooden framed things covered in leather and the like, to give just a little bit of cover for the archers. And on the bigger ships, the catapults, they had enough deck space for catapults. Now the Romans went up against the Carthaginians, who were much better seafarers in the First Punic War, and then they found that they kept losing, so they came up with this. This is called a corvus, which means raven, and it's called raven because it has a beak. Let's hope that, oh, drat it. I'm sorry, I put these all in order beautifully, and then you try to add one, and it threw all the order out, but I do have more corvus. There we go. So you can see at the bottom here, it's got a big spike. So you have some sort of crane lifting mechanism, and then you drop that crunch onto the deck of the opposing ship, and then your superior Roman infantryman can then rush across and overwhelm the other ship, which can't get away because it's caught onto you because of this beak. And this worked, and they won several battles against their arch rivals, the Carthaginians, and ended up winning the First Punic War. The cheats. You know, I mean, there's another version of the corvus in a model. There are lots of reconstructions, some of them like this on the big swiveling mount, and the like. And if I don't want to, I'm conscious of not wanting to go too over time, so maybe I'll go to questions and answers now.
Excellent. I see that there's a question from Adam Yale. What do you think was the top speed of some of these ships?
Oh, I did write it down, what the top speed they got for the reconstruction. No, it's not within my notes. I'll get back to you. It's a very extremely good question.
Great, great. Just use the
But
chat window there.
but there are also the problems with trying to get the top speed, because they never seem to get the right crews. The people who end up volunteering, oh, I'll volunteer to take part in the experiment, they're almost always university students and not in the best condition academics. They takes a long time, it turns out, to train trireme rowers. The first time they took it out, it was horribly top heavy, and they realized they'd miscalculated the ballast and the effects of putting the people in. And it took them several years to get decent maneuverability stats out of it.
Huh. Must take extraordinary synchronization and orchestration of all the oarsmen.
Yes, and we do know that one of the crewmen was a flautist, and it's believed that better than drums, because there are an awful lot of presumably beating noises with the oars and the like. So something like a piccolo really cuts through. It's the loudest instrument in the orchestra, you know, the piccolo.
Wow. Well, thank you, Nicholas. All right. Please hang on in case there's some questions later.
Okay,
Jacques,
I'm going to look up that speed.
thank you so much. That was quite fascinating.